Yeah.
So I want to, take the idea of transformation and segue into the miracles that you write about, where the dead have been brought back to life. It's a big transformation. And as you go through them, you've defined them. You've got the outcast, the ruler, the friend, the savior, the servant, the student. And I wonder, was a significance to the labels, as different segments of society?
Yeah.
You touch so many different segments of society.
Yeah, this is the cool thing. And when I started trying to create those original identifications, those were just for me initially. I never knew they were going to become the chapter titles when I first was starting to write those things. But then I started looking at the order in which things happened. Chronologically, I kind of take the stories in order. And I love that the first one is this desperate widow, a woman. She has nothing. And the more and more I got into that story and I started looking at Luke and how he wrote, Luke was all about the outcasts. And I definitely know what it's like to feel like an outcast. And I was considering who might pick up this book and read it. And there's so many people that think, Christians are all the same. They don't care about this. They're sexist or they're homophobic or they're whatever. And there's all these misconceptions going around that, anybody in a church thinks this way. And I was like, man, look at where Jesus is. Look at who he is hanging out with and talking to. And that one is my favorite, the outcast, because so many of us feel that way. We won't say that. We don't talk like that. But we really can relate to that person. And I just love that chapter. I love that account of how he went to her and who he cared for. And Luke just continually brings up all the outcasts. So there's that one. That was kind of really my favorite. But, then we talk about the ruler, a guy who has it all. He's kind of an influential leader in his town. I was thinking of like a business person, a business leader who kind of has it all together. And they have a reputation at stake. And it might be detrimental to their position to openly, acknowledge God in certain ways. And what makes us overcome those social constraints. And then Lazarus, the friend, the most personal one. This is where it really digs deep. This is where you got to really check your belief in Jesus, because his best friends are begging him for help, and he's willing to let them suffer the death of his friend. And he waits. He doesn't just fix it. If anybody ever looked at Jesus and said, why did you let this happen? You can relate to Mary and Martha. And Lazarus, he's dying, and he's probably thinking, Jesus is my literal, good friend. And why is he letting me suffer like this? I'm going to die, and he doesn't even do anything about it. It's a very personal look in that way. So those are the first three.
Actually, and I was going to ask you which one of those had the most impact for you as you were researching and writing it. So that obviously you answered that, the outcast was the one.
Well, they're all different.
Well, just go through them if you don't mind.
Go through the rest of them? Sure. The outcast I loved because I just picture somebody who needs to know they're not alone, somebody who needs to know that life can be better. I picture them, reading the book potentially and just connecting. That's such a special one for me because of the potential for people who don't understand, how awesome Jesus is. He's not this, he's not this white dude on a church poster. You know what I mean? He's so different than what we think of. And then I talk about him. He's the Savior, and I go there. And it's not an apologetic book, but I do talk about some of the historical facts that we can verify, and just real briefly before I get to the meaning of it. And the last two people that were brought back to life from death, one is called the servant, and her name is Tabitha. And Tabitha's really cool because she's that person in town that like takes care of everybody. She goes and finds the homeless people. She finds the most needy individuals and just pours herself into them. And they rely on her. And when she dies, people are desperate for something because they don't know what they're going to do without her. And I love that idea that our lives make an impact so much that when we're gone, people notice. Like, we should live that way. That the absence of our life impacts others because, you know, we made a difference. And the last one is Eutychus, the student. And so that one was kind of another favorite because I think of students all the time. I teach for a living. I love students. My college kids they're just so great. I sit there and look at myself when I teach day after day. I just picture myself so often. And here was a kid who was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to be where he thought God wanted him, and it didn't work out too well for him. And he ended up going through a really painful experience. So, I thought through Eutychus' story a lot, and I really went into that one in my own life and in my own mind, thinking, what would I need to know, 10 years ago as a student? And so I think a lot of people, especially post-college age, like 26 to 30s, whatever, that's a really scary time, especially now. Mm-hmm. People are graduating. They're not getting jobs. They're going back home. They don't know what to do. They want to find their place in society, and it's just not the best time right now. And so a lot of people are trying to find their identity, and they're caught in that space between college and the rest of their lives. So those are the main characters in the book, but there's other chapters as well.
Lazarus is probably the most recognized person on that list. Yeah. And based on what you just said, I don't think I'm the only one, but what really struck deep into my heart is the level of betrayal or doubt that Mary and Martha must have felt. And you said this, like, that in-the-flesh relationship would have been so much more intimate, and that feeling of being let down by, like, the physical person of Jesus, I think would have been so much more confusing and disheartening. Here it is, you've witnessed the miracles he's done, and you know in such a desperately real way what could have been done for your brother and then what was not done. And that's something that I really related to in having sometimes those, like you say, you can relate to Mary's question, where were you? We don't see the big picture, and we don't always know what his plan is.
And I take it a step further. I talk about, not only those individuals, but what about Jesus' dad, Joseph? We don't know where he is. Mm. We don't hear anything about him during Jesus' entire ministry and death. Most people think Joseph had died in that time period. And I know that it's hard to believe, but could you just see Jesus? He had brothers. He had at least 2 sisters. He had 4 brothers. And his brothers didn't even believe. Like, they didn't believe he was the Savior at first, not until after he was dead. And could you just see Joseph, like, sick and dying, and everybody in the house, like, come on, Jesus. If you're ever going to do something, surely you're going to make Dad better. Or Mary and Martha, surely you're going to fix Lazarus. All you got to do is say the word. You don't even have to come here. Just think it,
Yeah.
And could you just see them throwing that in his face? And I can relate to throwing stuff in God's face. Why did this happen? Why do you make us go through so much pain? Why do I put myself out there for you? And you just make it hurt. You make me suffer. I've had those wrestling matches with God, and I can just see it in these characters. And I think, man, exactly what you just said. I'm doing it with a God that I don't see and walk with. Could you imagine if you really knew that you were alongside the Son of God and you still had to go through that?
And they still had their faith. I mean, there's moments of doubt that you have, but, I didn't write it down here, but you had said that, of course I can't quote it, that belief at that time when he said, do you believe? And she said, yes.
Yeah.
That is something it's a miracle in itself, really, you know, that you could feel that way and still believe.
And you know what else is awesome about that? When Mary and Martha, they both come to him and they both say, why did this happen? Why didn't you come sooner? Why didn't you do something? Never does Jesus throw it in their face and be like, how dare you? You know, he never does that. He weeps with them and he loves them.
Mm-hmm.
He's okay with wrestling.
And one thing you said about miracles is that miraculous events of this magnitude probably weren't much easier to explain in the first century than they are now. And I never really thought about that before because, you know, you read about them in the Bible and you get used to them and you think, well, that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. And I guess I forget that they didn't happen back then either. I mean, bringing somebody back from death is a really big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they do still happen. Supernatural events do still happen, and I think that's the reality, is that we don't really pay too much attention to supernatural stories until they come into our life. And then we just want to tell people about them. And you can't, it's too personal. You can't explain, you know, when you witness something that insane or when you experience something crazy supernatural, so many people have their own stories, but they don't often get communicated very well. And there's never, it seems, a huge amount of witnesses to these things.